Hi there everyone, it's Russell. Welcome to the Reading Fabricator, and today with my final book of the year, it is also the most dense book of the year, the thickest book of the year. It is American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin, an absolute thick beast of a book. This thing just really took its toll on me. It's just unlike anything I've ever read before, and it might go down as probably the greatest non-fiction book I have ever read. Now, I've only read a few non-fiction books, but this one here definitely ranks as the best one. Now, before I start, I'd just like to say that even though this is non-fiction, so it's technically not really a spoiler type thing, I will be delving into his life from the beginning all the way to the end in certain aspects. So if you're one that would prefer not to know about him or prefer to do your own research yourself, even with the movie coming out, then I suggest reading the book or just researching him in general on the internet before watching this video, because I will be delving into some things that I guess could technically be a spoiler, even though it's not a fiction book. But nonetheless, this thing here is in my top 10 books of the year. A winner of a Pulitzer Prize. It took Martin Sherwin 20 or so years just to compile all this information, just all this research and interviewing. He just compiled just all these papers, and then he brought on Kai Bird to restructure it and put it together in a format that is readable and engaging. Sort of like reading a thriller almost. And parts of this did read like a thriller. You just engaged in the whole process of what was going on within Oppenheimer's very complicated life. He was a very, very complicated individual. Detailing the triumph and tragedy of Oppenheimer, it focuses on his birth all the way to the Los Alamos Institute, where he was the administrative director and was in charge of everything there, through to the Trinity test, through to his later life, including his hearings with the AEC, which ended up getting his security clearance revoked, which was a huge travesty in the scientific community and led to him being considered a physicist martyr, all the way to his death at the very end from throat cancer due to chain smoking. He didn't live a long life. I think he died at the age of 62. But what he did in that lifespan can be immediately in the top 0.1% of the greatest human beings to have ever lived, especially in the 20th century. He was truly a mind unto itself. He's almost incomparable to anyone else. I mean, you could compare him almost like to Einstein or Nikola Tesla in terms of having just an absolute brilliant mind. And all the various name drops that happen in this book. There are so many name drops. I lost track of it, and that to me was the hardest part of this book, was keeping up with all the various people that come in and out of his life at various points, including some that come up at the beginning and then show up later on in the book, and you sort of have to remind yourself, okay, who is this person again? There's a few times where I've had to pause reading and actually do some research on these characters just to reintroduce myself to them, because this book did take me 2 weeks to read, so there were certain aspects where I just forgot about it and had to basically reintroduce myself to the whole idea or concept of them with regards to Oppenheimer's life. But Julius Robert Oppenheimer was basically a child prodigy from the very start. He showed an immense interest in anything. I mean, from rock collecting to music, and in particular his absolute love for America. He was an avid sailor. Him and his brother Frank would go on all these sailing trips together. They had their own boat, and he was brought up in a wealthy American family, so he was well off from the start. But where it really clicked into place for me was when he went down to New Mexico and took all these trips on horseback along the ranches and all the mountains and the desert plains, and he describes the beauty of it and how he just completely fell in love with the whole idea of just being by yourself in this wonderful environment. From there onwards, it was piece of cake, really, until we got to the whole communist side of things. And this book contains a lot of details on the Communist Party and how communism plays a huge part in the McCarthy era with regards to the hearings where he got his security clearance revoked. I think the vote was 2-1 against Oppenheimer. So, I mean, I learned so much about this guy that I did not know before. I really did think. I mean, when people think of Oppenheimer, they immediately think, oh, he's the father of the atomic bomb and that's it. But there's so much more to this guy. There really, really is. Now, even though the book is subtitled The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer, I truly think that this book is an out-and-out tragedy. I mean, even with his triumph, which was the creation of the atomic bomb and the successful test of it, which happens at the exact midway point of this book. So it really is like a mountain, the high peak of the book. He himself expressed great disdain for the idea of using it and further developing projects in regards to the atomic bomb, including the creation of the super bomb or the hydrogen bomb. He was very much against the idea of that. He liked the idea of sharing this knowledge with the rest of the world so that they could all be better prepared for it, rather than just America going out and out and just creating an arsenal and using it. And that led to a lot of enemies. I mean, even friends that Oppenheimer had at the very beginning sort of turned against him at the very end. So it was very split 50-50. His friendships sort of came and went. Some were lifelong friends, and others that started off as great friends and then just went against everything that he believed in towards the latter half of his life, including probably the most tragic one of all, which was Ernest Lawrence, who was an American physicist. He won the Nobel Prize, and if one thing I'll say from all this is that there are so many people that I mentioned in this book that won Nobel Prizes, even though Oppenheimer never did himself. And Ernest Lawrence and him started out as colleagues, and then he got him involved in the whole Manhattan Project. And it was around the time where they were bringing forth the idea of creating the hydrogen bomb and all that, and producing an arsenal for America, where Ernest and Oppenheimer sort of split, and Ernest just really just did not like Oppenheimer's ideals at that time. And that to me was one of the true tragedies of the book, and there are many tragedies in this book. So really the whole triumph aspect is only a small portion of it. Really, this is just a series of events that led to the downfall of a great mind, a beautiful mind, so to speak. So when Oppenheimer went to university, he started out in chemistry, I think it was, and then he switched over to physics. He went over to Cambridge in England, and he sort of had a bit of a mental breakdown of sorts. He just was not himself, and that was a big surprise to me. I didn't think he was the sort of person that would suffer from that. He gave a poison. It was alleged that he produced a poisoned apple and gave it to one of the professors there or lecturers there. Whether or not the person actually ate it and got sick is up for debate. I don't quite recall what actually happened, but his friends at the time were shocked to find out about it, and he went to see therapists and all that sort of thing. And eventually, he accepted a position in Göttingen, where he completed his PhD. And once he moved there, everything changed. He just got happy again. He was enlightened. He was alive. And one thing you'll find out from reading this book is that he had a way with words. He could give all these lectures and speeches, whether to a group of people or to an entire auditorium, and people would be entranced by the way he spoke. That is the recurring theme in this book, is that he just had a way with words. Even with his soft, mellow, almost whispery type voice, people would just lean in and they would just listen carefully to him and take in everything. And most of the time I agree with him. There was very few people that didn't agree with him when they listened to these lectures, apart from some that were involved with the AEC Commission, or the Atomic Energy Commission, I think is what it's called. And I too found Oppenheimer's way of words to be fascinating. There are certain speeches in this book that are recreated word for word, and you see just what a great intellect he really is. The whole communist aspect comes into play after he comes back from Europe with his PhD. He accepts a job in California, and he meets a woman by the name of Jean Tatlock, who is going to become a psychiatrist, Dr. Jean Tatlock, someone who suffered from Great Depression, and she was a very complicated individual in of herself. Unfortunately, it led to her suicide in, I think, 1942 or something like that, where she ended up taking a bunch of pills and then submerging herself into a bathtub full of water. And she was someone that Oppenheimer affiliated with romantically, and through her, he became affiliated with the Communist Party. Whether or not he joined the Communist Party or not is up for debate, because it's never actually outright said in the book whether or not he was a communist or he just knew many people that were communists. He claimed that he wasn't, but there are many people that claim that he was. So it's always back and forth. I don't think he was a communist, but I think he was affiliated with that through Jean Tatlock, and he had many friends that through that. And he seemed to have an absolute support of what was going on with the Spanish Civil War at the time, including trying to send funds to help the people that he supported in Spain. And one of the people that was fighting in Spain for the Communist Party ended up being a man that was married to his future wife, Catherine Oppenheimer, or Kitty as she was referred to. And he ended up dying in Spain. And after he broke things up with Jean Tatlock, he was with Catherine, although she was also married when she got back, when they first met. And when he took her on a trip to New Mexico, he ended up getting her pregnant while she's still with another man. So that's how that came about. So he ended up calling the guy, letting him know. And through that, he ended up marrying Kitty through getting her pregnant while she was with another man. So that was a very complicated affair. But that's just the first, I'd say, 150 pages of the book. From there, you get the whole Los Alamos Institute thing where he is brought on board to be the director there. Initially, it starts off as a whole hell show. Like, there's so many things that are just not clicking into place. It's an absolute chaos. But eventually, after a few months, he sort of finds his rhythm and gets things working. And the whole section that takes place at Los Alamos with the development of the atomic bomb is some of the greatest nonfiction I've ever read. It really does read like a thriller. It's almost like a series of montages from one section to the next until you get to the final Trinity test. And the Trinity test is absolutely amazing. It's told in, I think, only 2 or 3 pages, but in such a way that you envision it. You envision that you're actually there watching this whole thing. I'm going to read some sections from that, which are accounts of the actual bomb drop itself from various points of view. It's very good. Richard Feynman was standing 20 miles from the Trinity site when he was handed dark glasses. He decided he wouldn't see anything through the dark glasses, so instead he climbed into the cab of a truck facing Alamogordo. The truck windshield would protect his eyes from harmful ultraviolet rays, and he'd be able to actually see the flash. Even so, he reflexively ducked when the horizon lit up with a tremendous flash. When he looked up again, he saw a white light changing into yellow and then orange. A big ball of orange. The center that was so bright becomes a ball of orange that starts to rise and billow a little bit and get a little black around the edges. And then you see it's a big ball of smoke with flashes on the inside of the fire going out. The heat. This next bit is by James Conant. James Conant had expected a relatively quick flash of light, but the white light so filled the sky that for a moment he thought something had gone wrong and the whole world has gone up in flames. Bob Serber was also 20 miles away, lying face down and holding a piece of welder's glass to his eyes. Of course, he wrote later, just at the moment my arm got tired and I lowered the glass for a second, the bomb went off and I was completely blinded by the flash. When his vision returned 30 seconds later, he saw a bright violet column rising to 20,000 or 30,000 feet. I could feel the heat on my face a full 20 miles away. Frank Oppenheimer was next to his brother when the gadget exploded. Though he was lying on the ground, the light of the first flash penetrated and came up from the ground through one's eyelids. When one first looked up and one saw the fireball, and then almost immediately afterwards this unearthly hovering cloud. It was very bright and very purple, Frank thought. Maybe it's going to drift over the area and engulf us. He hadn't expected the heat from the flash to be nearly that intense. In a few moments, the thunder of the blast was bouncing back and forth on the distant mountains. But I think the most terrifying thing, Frank recalled, was this really brilliant purple cloud, black with radioactive dust, that hung there, and you had no feeling of whether it could go up or drift towards you. So this is among a few other various accounts of all the perspectives of the people that were there watching the Trinity test. And as you can see, many of them were many miles away, and it still hit them pretty hard. As for Robert Oppenheimer's reaction, this is quite good. This is a quote that was taken from a 1965 NBC documentary. Oppenheimer later said that at the sight of the unearthly mushroom clouds soaring into the heavens above Point Zero, he recalled lines from the Gita. In the 1965 NBC television documentary, he remembered, "We knew the world would not be the same. A few people laughed, a few people cried. Most were silent. I remember the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him, he takes on his multi-armed form and says, 'Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.' I suppose we all thought that one way or another." That's one of the most famous things from the entire book, actually, and there's a clip of it on YouTube about a minute long where he describes that. And some people have referred to it as one of the first apology videos. You could see just look of despair in his eyes when he recalls that moment. Not whether or not he was actually proud of it, and apparently he was proud of it. One person recalled that after the actual atomic bomb flash, they looked at Oppenheimer and he sort of had this like high noon walk that he was amazed and proud of what he did, that it actually worked, but that the regret came later, obviously. This next quote from Oppenheimer comes from an award ceremony, which is when he resigned his directorship at Los Alamos, and he forewarns everyone that was there marking the occasion. Speaking in a low, quiet voice, he expressed his hope that in the years ahead, everyone associated with the lab's work would be able to look back on their achievements with pride. But on a sober note, he warned, today that pride must be tempered with a profound concern. If atomic bombs are to be added as new weapons to the arsenals of a warring world, or to the arsenals of nations preparing for war, then the time will come when mankind will curse the names of Los Alamos and Hiroshima. And there's a really very somber moment where when the whole thing happened, and he used to refer to Los Alamos as his great love, this New Mexico as being one of the greatest places on earth, and building this Trinity site, he sort of said that he absolutely destroyed this beautiful world. He talks about how when the Trinity bomb went off, it just eviscerated all the living creatures, and it really hit him hard. There's aspects of that later on throughout the book where certain animals die, and he just hits him hard, but due to him recalling when the Trinity test went off and killing all the animals in that section of New Mexico. So certain parts of that seem to hit his psyche. But in the midst of this, him and Kitty had two children, a daughter, Tony, and a son, Peter, who also had a bit of conflicting relationships with him. Peter and Kitty in particular, just there wasn't a love bond there. I mean, she loved him as a son, but was never really close to him, which was unfortunate. And around the same time as the AEC Commission had their hearings for revoking his security clearance, this is all due to many wiretappings that a person by the name of Lewis Strauss, who, out of all the books I've read this year, Lewis Strauss has to go down as the biggest villain of the year, even though he's non-fiction. He's just an absolute son of a bitch. He was an American businessman, philanthropist, and naval officer who served 2 terms on the US Atomic Energy Commission. And he had it out for Oppenheimer from day one. Honestly, from day one, he had it out for him. He just did not believe in these ideals, and it only got progressively worse from there. They were very much headbutting with each other. And it got worse and worse, especially when Oppenheimer opened up this institute, I think it was at Princeton, where he invited all the smartest people on Earth to congregate and sort of give lectures and teachings there. Amongst whom were Einstein, and I think he even invited T.S. Eliot for a couple of terms, the person who wrote The Wasteland. Although he was very disappointed because while Eliot was there, the only thing he wrote what Oppenheimer termed to be the worst thing he's ever written. But there are some beautiful moments where he's walking with Einstein and chatting with him, and amongst other physicists as well. He seemed to have a bit of a problem with mathematicians who had a bit of an ego thing going on there. But the whole idea of the Institute sounds absolutely fascinating. I wanted to learn more about that, and it's not as detailed in the book as I hoped it would have been. But the whole idea of communism, and I'm honest when I say this, I think the whole communist thing and the hearings which had to do with the Communist Party take up about 200 pages of this book, maybe more. It is a huge chunk of this book, so if that's something that you're interested in, then this is probably the one for you. But Lewis Strauss got so fed up with Oppenheimer and his views on pulling back the development of the super bomb or the hydrogen bomb that he set about basically pestering Hoover and pestering the new incoming president, Dwight Eisenhower, just to keep wiretapping everything and keeping Oppenheimer under constant surveillance. I mean, I can completely see why Oppenheimer had enough, honestly. He always referred to himself as a true patriot American who absolutely loved America, but for some reason, Lewis Strauss had this really bizarre thing where he could see this red Soviet sub just lifting up and taking Oppenheimer and his family back to the Soviet Union. He was just a really bizarre individual who just had some really strong ideas about Oppenheimer being part of Russia or being affiliated with the Communist Party. And obviously, I think due to being romantically involved with Jean Tatlock, I think that was the downfall of him being introduced to the whole Communist Party, unfortunately. Even though he himself, I don't think, was ever actually personally a member. He never actually had a card that said he was a member or anything like that. But it led to his downfall. And the whole hearing section, which takes up about 40, maybe 50 pages of this book, is thrilling. It is absolutely brilliant. A lot of it is told in transcripts between this really, really brutal prosecutor and the people that came to the defense of Oppenheimer. Even though it was never referred to as a trial, it might as well have been, because honestly, Lewis Strauss had it out for him from day one. He had several thousand pages of information based on all the wiretapping and all the conversations that Oppenheimer had that ended up being recorded. And he had the panel read all that, but he wouldn't let Oppenheimer's defense read that, so he was underprepared. So the whole hearing was pretty much decided from the get-go. They just had no chance of winning. Oppenheimer was doomed from the very start. Lewis Strauss ended up getting his comeuppance, although I won't say how, but maybe it was a little too late for him. And the prosecutor that they hired to pretty much nail Oppenheimer was an absolutely brutal son of a bitch. I think his name was Roger Robbs or something like that. And he basically, in a way, got Oppenheimer to admit that he cheated on his wife right there in front of her in court. He also cheated on her another time with this woman who was 11 years older than her, who was also, I think, a psychologist by the name of Ruth Tolman. The Tolmans being great friends of Ernest Lawrence, and when Ernest Lawrence found out about that, it made him just despise Oppenheimer even more. So that was a real tragedy there, seeing Ernest Lawrence and Oppenheimer split, especially since they'd had so many years of friendship dating back to the 1930s, I think, in California. I could keep going on about this, but honestly, that's just a small portion of this book, an absolute small portion of this book. It's 700 pages, of about 100 pages of which are notes and errata. But if you want to know anything about Oppenheimer, if you want to see the definitive work on him and his life, this is the book to go to. It really is. This will make you know more about Oppenheimer than 99.8% of the world's population. Now, heed this warning. When you start reading this, you will have to dedicate yourself to it because it is truly a dense piece of work. Now, I don't mean that in a scientific sense. It's just the amount of name drops going on, the amount of time that it gets accumulated into such small passages. It really is a lot to take in. You sort of have to take breaks every 5 to 10 pages in order to process what you've just read. But if you do get through it, I assure you that this will probably be one of your favorite reads of the year. I know it was mine. And I'm really glad I read it. And I'm looking forward to Christopher Nolan's movie, Oppenheimer. But as it stands, that was American Prometheus review. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, by all means, like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Catch you on the next one. Bye.